I'm so happy to be back, and I just wanted to welcome everyone back again, and also just sort of acknowledge that these are really challenging times for all of us, and that we as educators have a really critical role to play in helping all of our students achieve the literacy skills that definitely have power and value in their lives for their lifetime. So I really just think we really need to make sure that we're doing our very best to teach our kids well and teach them how to read so that they can take that out into the rest of their lives and be successful. In our last evening together, we looked a lot at phonological awareness and moving children towards phonemic awareness, which is being able to use and hear and discriminate and remember and manipulate all the individual speech sounds in our language. So that when we're able to hear the sounds at a phonemic level, we actually can hear each speech sound in isolation and pull them apart and move them around and work with them. And that is a huge and important skill for our little ones when they're learning orally first. And then as we move them along the lines of learning how to read, we actually need to use those same skills, but to attach them to print. And we began talking about that a little bit the last time when we were introducing single sounds in isolation to learn those letter sounds that go with each of the letters. We talked a lot the last time about making sure that we're being quite systematic about the letters that we're choosing, and that we're making sure that we're teaching every single letter sound and all of the speech sounds so that our children can be successful readers. Tonight, we'll plan and prepare for using structured literacy in our classrooms, and we'll talk specifically about what we need to think about and how we need to go about teaching those pieces in our classroom so that we make sure that we're giving our kids a really good sound start. So I think when I'm thinking about what I think about when I want to prepare for teaching in a structured literacy program in my room, I know that kids need to know all the letters in the alphabet, but they also need to know that letters can be combined to make other sounds, and that we use some combinations of letters to represent different sounds. So there's a lot there for little ones to learn, and it's really important that we start early because there's a lot to learn. And in order to be a successful reader, you need to know all of it. You can't read with only a little tiny piece of that. You can start, but the fact is we need to know how to read and use all of those pieces so that we can be successful readers and be able to decode anything that we choose to read. We need to know how letters can be combined to make words, and we need to understand that when we see words in print, there's a space between each word that tells us a new word is starting. We need to know that vowels can make more than one sound, a short sound and a long sound, and we need to know that combinations of letters make different sounds and new sounds that we may not have seen before when we had single letters. We need to know that when we're reading, we start from the left and we move sequentially along to the right, and we say the sounds in order as we read. We need to know about punctuation. Sorry, I felt like I was going fast. I was trying to slow down. We know that our kids need to understand that words have meaning, and that the reason that we would go to read something is so that we can understand what the words are telling us. That's why we read. So we need to teach letters. How do we choose which letters are the right ones to start with? We know we need to teach all of them, but how do we decide which letters would be useful to teach first? Remember at the last webinar, we started with the short I sound, and I said that I picked short I for my kindergarten students because it's quite easy for them to recognize, it's quite easy for them to see and to hear that sound. And on mine, they're on a yellow card, so already that highlights it a little more. And when I teach that letter sound, I really try to make a lot of emphasis about the sound and the way it looks so that we can make that connection start to happen. So I start with short I, and then I talk a lot about this letter, what it looks like. This is the letter I. It says eh, and in our class, we do a chant, so we say it, G, eh, eh. And we make very sure that we're hearing that sound really nicely. So I've given lots of opportunities for them to listen for other words, listen to the word if, listen to the word in, listen to the word igloo, so that they're already tuning in to that sound in their words. And then when I have them start to think about this one, we also want to talk about how to print that letter. So I've chosen short I because the printing of this one for little children is quite simple. And even little ones who are perhaps not yet ready to do a lot of print formation are able to be successful printing the letter I, because they can hold, even if they're still holding a marker in a fist, they can still make a downstroke and a dot. That downstroke is developmentally occurs quite early in terms of using a pencil or a marker. So that one's a nice one to start with. It's quite easy for them to recognize in a mix of other letters or other symbols because it's short, straight, and it has a dot at the top. And that dot really helps for a lot of little ones to recognize that short I. Once I've introduced one sound, the next day I will introduce a new sound. For me, the next sound I would introduce is the letter S. We would talk about the letter S. We would talk about the sound that it says. We would talk about what it looks like. Doesn't it look just like a snake? Isn't that interesting? And then often with these two letters, I will say, oh, I want to play a game with you, and I know I can trick you. Guess what? I'm never going to trick them. We only have two. I hide them behind my back, and I say, okay, when you see a letter, tell me what sound it says. What sound does this one say? S. And then I hide it back again. And then, oh, what about this one? S. Great. Okay, what about this one? Itchy, itchy, eh, eh, eh. And I'll try to go faster and faster because I want them to develop that very, very rapid recall of the way those letters sound so that they can know them and start to have that really fluent sense of what sound they say and what the symbol looks like. Want those pieces to stick together really well. So in the beginning of the school year, once I've started teaching letter sounds, or what we call the secret code of what readers and writers know, and then later we stop saying secret and we just say the code, and it is the alphabetic code of English. We do lots of work to practice those sounds. So each day we will review the sounds, say the sound, and then we'll also practice spelling those single sounds. And even though when we grown-ups think about spelling, we're thinking about words at the kindergarten level, and certainly at the beginning of kindergarten, we can actually be talking about spelling sounds just as much as we could be talking about spelling whole words. So I use my whiteboard, and my little children use their whiteboards or a chalkboard on their knees, and we will spell the sounds that we have learned. So I will then tell them a sound and they will write it down. So if I said, okay, let's write down S, then I watch and I observe my little learners, and many of them know it straight away and can get right to it. And some are a little slower, and I watch for them, and then I often will guide them, especially early on, because I know there are some who have not mastered all of what we've done so far. So I will have my marker ready and we'll say, oh, S, that's the snake letter. I remember it looks like a snake. So I'm going to make my marker go around and around and stop. There it is. And then, of course, as a teacher, I'm praising. I know that even if some people didn't know what that one looked like and they peeked at their neighbor, or they waited for me to write it first and then wrote it on their boards, they're still getting that practice, even if they needed to be more supported and more scaffolded than the ones who already knew it straight away. That's okay. They'll get lots of practice because we'll review and review and review. So next I would say, oh, now let's write down itchy, itchy, eh, eh, eh. And I'll wait and watch again, and then I too will model it. So down, 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 lift my marker, put a dot at the top. So that's what I'll do. And on the first and second and third days, there's only a few letters and that's it. So I'll wipe them off and off we go to play. Or off we go to snack, or off we go to whatever we're doing next. That kind of lesson at the beginning is very, very short because we only have a handful of little bits to work with. And they're not really at a point yet where they need that lesson to take a long time or where they need it to do a lot of things. Right now, it's about learning those sounds and starting to be able to use them. So they read them to me when I hold the card up and they say the sound. And then when I turn the card around to face me and I tell them a sound, they learn to print that sound. And that's what we're developing. We're also developing that routine so that as we get going, it gets easier and easier for them. As a side note, that routine has become very, very valuable in this time away from school because my little kindergartens are actually feeling that they are a little bit like they're at school. I've been doing some recording and I've been doing some live teaching of this, and parents commented straight away that their children paused the video and went running to get a marker and a paper because they knew what would be expected of them and they got right to it when it was time. So that routine was very, very comfy and familiar for them, and they were ready to go with it as soon as we got going on our online remote learning. So that was pretty neat to see. It's really important that as we go, we're trying to get them faster and faster and get them moving along with that, because that's an important piece of the puzzle too. It's not helpful if it takes us a very long time to sound out each word. We want our students to know those words and sounds instantly so that they can move along quickly. And we do that by practicing and reinforcing that practice. When we get to about 5 letters, so let's say now we're up to, I'll even do 4 for first. So now I've got 4 letters that my children know. They know itchy, they know s, they know f, and they know Did you notice all of those letters have quite long, stretchy sounds? I picked them on purpose because I wanted sounds that I could really, really hold so kids could listen and really be able to process that sound. I don't want to use right away the really short sounds like k or p or t, those stopping sounds, because they don't give children enough time sometimes to process those sounds. These long, stretchy ones to get us started mean that I can say, listen to the beginning of the word fish. What sound did you hear at the beginning of the word fish? And I can stretch it so they can hear it, and it starts to help them tune in to those sounds. So I've picked these ones on purpose. Once we get to a point where we know a few sounds, it's important to start to teach another critical skill for learning how to read. First, it was about learning letters and their sounds and learning how to learn letters and their sounds to read and spell. Now it's on to something new, and the big one now is learning to blend sounds together to read little words. Developmentally, this is a leap for a lot of little ones, and I would say it's not too worrisome if our little ones in their first year of kindergarten are a little shaky with blending sounds together. Ideally, by the time they turn 5, I would be hoping my guys would be taking off and blending 2 and 3 sounds quite comfortably. They know the sounds, and so that's what I would be hoping for. But that does not mean that I can't start working on it ahead of time, because I can model those and they can hear my voice, because blending is a big leap for a lot of little ones. So I like to do a few things. You maybe noticed already or are thinking that with I and S and F and M, there are not very many words that I could make that our little ones could read, but they can read little pieces of bigger words. Like if you had the I by itself and the beside it, this is I, im. Not a real word, but it is the beginning of other words like impossible. And so sometimes we can make little syllables and it's still reading, even if we're having children read little pieces of words that are not whole words yet. It's important not to think that you need to jump straight away onto 3 sounds, because that's a lot for little memories to hold in their heads and a lot of processing to happen. So if we start with 2 sounds and we teach them the skill of blending those sounds together, by the time we're ready to get going on other reading, they've had time to practice that skill. So I like to do a few little games and activities that help my little ones practice blending. One thing I like to do, little magnets here, is to have my consonants live in an apartment building just like that. We talk a little about what an apartment building looks like. Maybe the door is down here so they get an idea. And then we talk about how if you lived at the top floor, you might have to take an elevator to the top floor. So when little Itchy comes for a walk, Itchy might want to go up, up, up the elevator, and then each time Itchy will stand beside one of those consonants and we'll blend those sounds together. So, first floor, I, im. Good. Might be tricky. They might need to hear us say our sounds. I, im, im. So we say it a few times, we let them get a sense of how it sounds, and then up, 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 up we go. And now, if. Wonderful, great reading. And then up, 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 we go to the top floor. And then is. Sometimes it's fun on the way back down to come down the other side. So this time the consonant will be in front. And of course, right now, this Itchy is going to say I, even if it looks to an experienced reader like it might say a different sound, like I, but over here it'll say S, I, S. And then down, 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 down. I, and quite often little ones will notice that that sounds just like the beginning of fish, and they'll say that, and that's great for them to be listening, but it's important for them not to leap right to saying that that's the word fish, because it is not the word fish. We just say, oh, that's right, it does sound like fish. Say it again and say fi. Stop. And then finally down, down, down a little more, and then we get down to that meh. Perfect, great job. At the beginning, it's really quick, it's really easy, it's mostly my voice doing the blending, and the kids are listening, watching, taking all of that in. Sometimes our vowel will go for a walk down the street. Sometimes when we have a few vowels, our consonants will go for a walk, or they might go for a ride on a roller coaster, and I'll try the quickest roller coaster track, and then I'll stick some consonants or some vowels along it and have my letters go. And it's important with a roller coaster that it goes quite fast, because roller coasters are fast. So then we'll put that letter and we'll try to read them as fast as we can as it's creeping along that roller coaster. You can do the same with a Ferris wheel. Ferris wheels are fun because sometimes they go backwards and we can go back the other way. Lots of fun. Little ones love that. So there we go. So now we've got that bit done. Let's talk about what a whole lesson would look like now. So we've just gone over what it looks like to start to teach blending. And now let's look at what a whole lesson would look like from beginning to end, so that we've got all those bits that we've talked about already. So having them practice reading their sounds, having them practice spelling their sounds, having them practice blending little words, which is really two sounds at this point. And then the last bit we'll do is some spelling of those two sounds. So imagine then if I said, I wanted them to practice spelling those sounds, I would give them a little word. I try to make it a real word when I can, but not always. And I would say, okay, we're going to write down the word if. Like, if it doesn't rain, we'll go outside and play. Or if I feel thirsty, I will get a drink of water. Or if, and I give them lots of examples so they understand what that little word means. They know it's a real word. They know it's one they've heard before. Often they will start coming up with ideas for what they would use to say the word if, and then we can start to teach spelling with those sounds. So listen carefully as we spell. I will often put the word if right on my arm, and I'll say, okay, listen closely. If. And the children have done that 100 times before with me when we've been working on our phonological awareness and phonemic awareness skills. They know how to do that orally very, very easily. And so then it's not a huge leap to move from that. Pull that marker lid off, please. It's not a huge leap to move from that to actually spelling our sounds. So now we're writing down the word if. We've put the word on our arm or on our body, and then I often will show them again with my fingers. Okay, remember? If. Here we go. Let's write down. Then I'll write 2 little lines. And I always say these little lines represent the sounds. So let's write down if. And then I can say, oh, on the first line, we put the first sound in the word. Eh. What sound? Eh. And I wait and I watch. If nobody knows, I will tell them. But I like to give them a chance to hear it, think about it, and pull from their memory a sound that they already know. In this case, they often will say, itchy, And I'll say, that is exactly the right sound. Let's write it down on the first line. Down and a dot. If. What sound is on the second line? If. They know their sounds by now. We've been practicing them a lot, and they will go ahead and do that. That one I often will say is a candy cane that wears a belt. Just to help us remember how to print that letter F. So there's the word if. Then we'll say again. Let's check and make sure we've got it. If. Does that look like if? It does. Good for you. Off you go to play. Short and sweet. So a whole lesson now from beginning to end. Let's have a go. Let's start first with practicing saying our sounds by reading the single sound. So say, itchy, Fantastic, beautiful job. Now I'll turn those cards around and I'll get ready to dictate sounds. And the students, for the most part, in my class are often sitting on a little whiteboard so they can just pull it out and start to use it when it's time. Or they'll have it set flat across their knees so they're ready. You could also have them just print in the air with their finger or on the carpet in front of them. Sometimes that's a little tricky because some kids will just make wavy patterns with their fingers and it can be hard to notice that when you're scanning the room. So I like to use something that I can actually see, but I think it works either way. So then I'd say, okay, let's write down, Remember what it looks like? And I'll teach that very quickly, and we already will have practiced it because this bit at the beginning is all old news for us. We've already learned all of these and we're reviewing to start our lesson. Next sound. Okay, great. That one looks like, oh, the snake. Great work. And then let's write down itchy. Oh, let's do this. And I just pause long enough to watch my little people. If they're not getting it right away, I will always write it for them. I want them to get good feedback of what it is that I'm asking them to write so that it goes with that sound that I've just said. But I also want them to use their brains and not just wait for me to use mine. Okay, let's write down. Oh, that one's the candy cane that wears a belt. Great, okay, write it down. Wonderful. Once we've got those done, then I'll wipe off my board. And then we'll practice that blending that we did already. And I'll show you one more time. This time, maybe let's do, just for fun, a roller coaster. We'll go up the track and down the track. One year in our kindergarten class, we ended up doing a whole inquiry about roller coasters because somebody didn't know what a roller coaster was. And I was using it like this. And they said, that's kind of cool. Can I see? And we ended up watching videos and learning all about roller coasters, all because of a code lesson. So then I'll just stick those code cards right on there. And then off we go. That little vowel wants to go for a ride on the roller coaster. See how quick and simple that is? It's not fancy or fussy at all. It's really fast. And then, oh, I'd like to go for a ride on the roller coaster. Okay. In you hop. Is. Great. Ideally, I would be pointing to these letters. It's a little tricky when I hold a board. When I've been teaching virtually, this has been how I've done this. If. It's really important that we teach our kiddos that we are saying each sound, 1, and then the next, and then saying them faster and faster to make them sound smooth and fast like a word. Im, im, im. We can get it fast, fast, fast. Sometimes we might go backwards because roller coasters sometimes do go backwards. They always go fast. So we practice that to get that really quick. And then we would do that same thing with writing down a little word before we get ready to learn something new. So once we've done that, and we've done our little word, we put our little lines, maybe we did the word im today, and we did I and we wrote them down, we checked them carefully and read our word again. That's great. Then we set our boards back down and we get ready to learn something new. And I will say, just like before, close your eyes and get ready and say these words after me. Say the word cup, and they say cup. And I say the word cookie, and they say cookie. And I say the word candy, and they say candy. And I say the word catch, and they say catch. And say the word cat, and they say cat. And I'll say, what sound was the same in all of those words? If you remember from before, that is helping them hear that sound. And it's really important because if they don't even recognize it as a speech sound, it's going to be much harder for them to learn it as a sound to write down and think about for reading and spelling. Once they've said, we heard k, 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 that's exactly the sound. Put your hand right on your throat and notice that you can feel that sound in the back of your throat. It's coming from way back there. Do we need to use our voice for that one? No, we don't. It's only a soft whisper sound, but we can feel it back there because our throat is doing the work. Wonderful. The sound that we're hearing and the sound we're saying is the sound of the letter C. Oh my goodness, look how it looks just like a cookie with a big bite missing. Isn't that funny? It looks just like it. What kind of cookie do you like best? I like oatmeal raisin. I'm going to pretend this is an oatmeal raisin cookie for me to look at it. And then we'll teach about printing that letter C. That's really important, and the letter C is super important for lots of other letters, so it's important that we teach it well and teach it properly right from the beginning. I have very deliberately waited to put my short A sound after that C because I want them to use that C shape when they print their A. So I will now take my marker and say, okay, watch really carefully. I've been working really hard on learning how to get so that my little ones can see the tip of my marker as I'm writing, because I don't want my hand to be in the way. I want there to be no way that they didn't see. So watch carefully, watch carefully. Here I go. I'm going to make my marker go up, up, curve up a little, around, and stop. Often our little ones, developmentally, will start with a downward stroke. So it's important that we want to say sort of a dragging motion first and then scoop around. And we'll practice a few. We'll say how funny it is that they look just like cookies with bites missing. We'll say that k, k, k sound over and over and over to really flood that in, get it in their eyes, get it in their ears, help it stick into their brains. And then we'll get ready to do the next little bits of our lesson. So now we've got this brand new piece of information, this new k sound that we need to attach to all the other bits that we already know. So now's our time when we would use that new piece. And again, right now it's quite short because we only have a few letters. But as the pack gets bigger, we have more letters to work with and play with and practice with. So for now, I'll say, oh my goodness, let's say this sound and then say this one and blend them together. I, k, ick. Great job. And maybe just for review, we might do this one. I, meh. I know my students do not, but I know that if I had a C with an I behind it, it will make that C a soft sound. I don't want to choose to put C in front of I right now because I don't want to reinforce that that would happen. I want to leave that alone. Always or often we'll have little ones in kindergarten who have seen this pattern before and already know that it says s, eh, si, and we don't want to break that if they've got it. So I always try to keep that C behind there, and I know I've got short A coming right after this C, so I'll be able to practice that C at the beginning and C at the end very, very soon. After that, we'll do the same thing again, and we'll practice spelling. So now we're spelling with that new code. So we're using that k, and we've only got one vowel so far, so we're going to write like, oh my goodness, imagine if you stepped in dog poo and it was so yucky and you said ick, ick. You could write down ick. Right now we don't have a CK, so we can't use that, and the kids don't know that yet, so we'll just use what we do have, and this is what we've got. So we'll write down ick, ick, ick. We could put it on our body, we could put it on our arm, we can put it on our fingers. I always put it on my fingers when I'm starting so that I can really make sure that I'm saying ick, ick. 2 sounds. That means we need 2 little lines. My children often will try to count the lines when they're writing them, but I would like them to say their sounds again to put on those lines. So I always say the sounds, some of them quietly whispered numbers as they're counting how many lines to do, but it's important that we help them learn that each of those lines represents a sound. So ick, ick. Let's write on the first line first. Itchy, itchy, Great, write it down. And then ick, ick. You can see how 2 sounds helps us to figure out beginning sound and ending sounds, even if we maybe are not quite at a point where we're hearing ending sounds very consistently. Because it's only 2 sounds, there's not too much to expand our minds and try to think and figure out. So that works really well for getting our little ones started. Of course, we know that even once we've learned all those 26 letters, and we just keep going, once we've taught that one, we teach the next one. Once we've taught that one, we teach the next one. But we know that in addition to all of those letters, there are also some combinations of letters, and some of them are really important and show up very, very early in lots of the words that little ones would need to read. It's important to embed those ones into our teaching as well. For me, I've tried to add them in fairly early, some of them, because I think for my little ones, it's been really helpful for them to start to understand early on that sometimes letters will work together to do something different. So I have been working with my little ones to learn some digraphs and some units to help us expand what we can read and spell. And you do have my scope and sequence is tucked in there for these beginning sounds. And so you can have a look and see, but I have my CH fairly early. Once I've taught C and once I've taught H and we've practiced with them a bit, I think CH is fair game for us. So we would use that fairly soon. The same with SH, the same with TH, the same with WH. Those ones are fairly common. They show up a lot in little words that our little ones need to know. And they're not that difficult for most of our kids. Those are digraphs. It's a team of letters working together to make one sound. And when I teach a digraph to my kiddos, I teach them that definition as well. So listen carefully. Chips, chocolate, chicken, choose, choo-choo. What sound was the same in all those words? Ch. And then I can start to teach them, oh my goodness, the sound you're hearing is the sound of C and H together. We can't hear the k sound like cookie, and we can't hear the h sound like the H says anymore. Now they're working together, they're a team, and they're working together to make one new sound, and that sound is ch, just like chop, chop, chop. For a while, I might add that action in. It certainly is supportive for some of our littlies, so that's really helpful. And I really want them to get to the point where I can say, oh, why are there 2 letters on there? And they can say, that's a digraph. And I'll say, what's a digraph? And they'll say, it's a team of letters working together to make one sound. And so each time then, as I'm pulling out my sounds and I'm flipping through them and they're telling me the sounds, I get to that one and I'll say, oh, look at that, what's happening? And they will right away tell me the sound and they will tell me, that's a digraph. It's a team of letters working together to make one sound. Does it look scary then? No, because we have practiced with it quite a lot. So we talk about it, we play with it, we practice with it, just like we would with any other piece of code. But some of those digraphs can be quite sneaky because they look big, they look meaty, and some of our littles sometimes can get a little startled by that. Similarly, I have pink cards. These are units, and a unit card is a little group of letters that work together and they make a very specific sound that's pronounced a special way whenever it happens together. I have all as a unit like that. They can be sneaky because in this one, think about that sound of that A. When we learned A, it said apple, apple, ah, ah, ah. And now this A is not saying its apple sound anymore. That's part of why I put it on a pink card. So it's a little reminder that it's doing something different. It's important to pay attention to that. Similarly, I have ink like that. I also have old like that I'll teach a little later in the year. But I start with ing. We need it a lot. We use it a lot. In our class, we sometimes get the king of ing, and we'll make a crown, and the king of ing then is responsible anytime anybody needs to spell ing to put their crown on and let the person copy down the letters for ing until they know them, and then we don't need to do that anymore. But for a bit, king of ing is pretty fun. It's a special job to have. So ing says ing, and again, I will teach that by really having my kiddos practice. Oh my goodness, look at this one, ing. Let's practice writing all of those letters down. By the time I'm teaching ing, they already know I, they already know N, they already know G, they know how to print them, so that printing piece becomes less important, as I know I've already taught them to print those letters carefully and well the first time. Still, they're little and they're learning, so it's still important for me to keep reinforcing. So I will say, oh, let's write down ing. So we'll start, we'll write down the I, we'll write down the N, and we'll write down the G. I might give them a verbal prompt of some kind as they're writing. Like when we do that N, I might say, dive down, bounce up and over one hump and stop. Or for the G, I might say, start with a magic C, up till it touches, down, 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 scoop, so that they get that verbal prompt. Many of my little ones, even now, say that prompt every time as they're printing, and it's very, very helpful for them. So there's ing. We've practiced it by itself. Now it's very important for us to practice it with those consonants that we already know. So by now, we would have a little pile of consonants that we know already, and then I can do the same thing. We've been practicing with blending two sounds. Often I find my kids make a leap when we get into our first unit, which is ing. That blending two sounds, when it starts to make something that sounds like a word they know, and sometimes it makes a word they know, it really tends to spark those little minds to understand what it is that two sound blending is really sounding like. So we'll say t, ing, ting. And then we'll flip to the next one and say b, ing, bing. And then we'll flip to the next one and say n, ing, ning. And then we'll go to the next one and say p, ing, ping. And I might say, oh, that's like the sound my phone makes. Or, oh, that's what it would sound like if I dropped a marble on the floor. Like that kind of thing that will help to pull in some of that meaning, because that's really what we're aiming for, is for our students to understand what those words mean. Ing, hing. Does it matter that we're doing some words that are not real? Not at all. Sometimes I'll say, is that a real word? And they know that it's not, but it's important for practicing blending. It doesn't matter too much as long as we're putting those sounds together and making them sound smooth and fast like a word. And when we get a real word, it's quite fun. Ing, king, just like a king. Cool. So that's very fun. And the kids really, really like those. And we can get going quite quickly then with blending those sounds together, because by then every day we have been practicing. Typically, I aim to teach about 3 or 4 sounds a week in kindergarten, which seems maybe like a lot. And it seems like a bit of a leap for some kids. And certainly you know your kids, you watch your kids. And if you're noticing that they're not keeping up, slow it down, ease it off. The important thing is that they are mastering those sounds. We don't want to have a whole shaky foundation. We want our kids to know their sounds and know them well. And so if they're not keeping up with 3 sounds, back it up to 2, but practice every day. Don't try to think that you can do 1 sound a week and then another sound the next week, and that's going to carry over, because it tends not to for most of our kids. And certainly our little struggly ones really need way, way, way more reinforcement than that. It's really, really important when we're looking at those letter sounds, we're saying the sound, sometimes saying the letter name. It's important for them to know that those letters have a name and we can use those letter names, but it's really, really, really important that we're making sure those sounds are really clear. Each time, same thing, we practice, 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 say the sound, say the sound, say the sound. And every time I do that, I also turn around and have them spell the sound, spell the sound, spell the sound, so that they are getting both sides of that reciprocal relationship, the blending and the segmenting, or the spelling and the reading, because they go together, and we want to make that wiring as smooth as it can be. That's what we're aiming for. Should put a lid on that one so it doesn't dry out completely. So that, now we've got all those bits. I want to talk to you a little bit more about printing. When I'm teaching my little ones, I use a card that I've made. They're quick and easy. Well, I should put that up a little higher so you can see. I've made these and they're quick and easy to make. I just use sentence strips or word strips and color them in so that there's a blue section at the top, a green section in the middle, and a brown section at the bottom. And then I use a Sharpie marker to go over that line so that we have a sidewalk for our letters to stand on. I've also started putting a little green light at one end and a little red light at the other so that kids will always start by the green light, so that I start to build that sense of left to right, left to right, left to right, even when we're practicing single sounds early on. So this is really helpful for me because when I'm teaching my kids their letters for the first time, I can help them anchor them to how tall or short they need to be, or whether they need to dig down into the dirt. They have that representation to help them really see what I'm saying. So if we're writing the letter T, I would say, oh, start your marker at the top of the sky and come straight down till it touches the sidewalk. So they already then have a good idea of how big and where that letter is going to go in that space. So they start at the top and they come straight down. Often in our class, we call the letter T a tall man that wears a belt, because when we write that letter T, that was a little easier. When we write that letter T, we come straight down and then we put a belt on. It really helps many of us to remember. And I picked those words a little bit on purpose because when I say tall, I can start to fade out tall man that wears a belt and just get it to tall, where they can hear that t sound at the beginning and then they tuck it into their minds and keep it there. So t, t, t. Fits right on the lines. If I want them to do I'll remind them that that letter fits in the grass. So it's not going to touch the blue sky. It's not going to go down digging in the dirt. It's just going to stay in the grass. So dive down from the top of the grass, bounce up and over one hump, stay in the grass, bounce up and over another hump, stay in the grass. And then we've got our letter M. Similarly, if I wanted to teach J, I'll teach that sound, J, J, J. But this time I do want them to dig down, down, down into the dirt. It's tricky for a lot of our little ones, so it's important to really teach it well. So we start at the top of the grass, and this time I often will use the word down, down, down a whole bunch of times to help them really get that sense that they're going quite a ways down. Let's say, start at the top of the grass, go down, 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 and then scoop in the dirt, and then lift up your marker and put a dot at the top. It's a great, great tool for teaching. I've laminated mine so that we can wipe them off and use them again and again and again and again. After a while, they do start to be hard to wipe, but for a while, and a good long while, they do work. I've had these ones a couple of years, so they've been doing their work for quite a long time. And they're very, very helpful. I often use my little cards when I'm doing smaller group instruction, and we use just a big plain whiteboard or chalkboard when we're at the carpet all together, because all of that wiping takes a lot of time and I don't want my carpet meeting to take that long. One other thing that's very fun is practicing our reading throughout our day. And so often when my little ones are busy playing and having fun or having their snack, I will walk around with a little pile of strips in my hand like this. I'll spread them out. Early in the year, these ones have, some of them just have little single words on them, and I would snip those even smaller so the cards would be really tiny. Later in the year, my strips are longer. I have some with single words, so my little ones who are not ready to read sentences or phrases are okay to just have 3 small little words that we have practiced. Other kids might have a little phrase, tall, wall, what piece of code do you think we're working on when we're reading this little phrase? What have we just learned that we're practicing? All. So this one has lots of all for us to practice. And often I'll walk around and say, pick a card, any card. And I fan them out, and the child will then pluck one card, one strip, quickly read what it says, and hand it back to me and carry right on with their snack, or right on at the water table, or right on building with blocks. Whatever they were doing before, they keep right on. But in the meantime, I've given them just a little tiny writing or reading job that they needed to do. Oh, here's another one. Ooh. Call Anne. Okay, off you go, back to work. These are trickier, quite a bit trickier, reading like this than reading a word that I've built with the code cards. So there it is. Imagine for my littles that this looks more supportive. They can see right away that it's two sounds, two pieces of code that they know, and they can say each card sound one at a time. So they can say k, all, call. When they see the word call on this little phrase, call Anne, the letters are very close together, and they can be quite intimidating for little ones. And they can also feel like they have to try to see all of it at once, and that processing is quite difficult. This color coding helps to spread those letters out and give them a chance to say each sound one after the next and then put them together to read a word. I often find the little ones, once we start to have some units in our pack, when we practice with them, they find those really helpful they still get to use just two sounds, but they're starting to make some real words, and that's really fun for them. Then, when I'm starting to see that my little ones are really being successful with reading two sounds, that's a good time to start to move into reading three sounds. And that's exactly what we can do when we've got a couple of vowels. And here we go, take a look, this is harder. I've discovered it's a little bit trickier to hold three sounds in my hands when I'm teaching on a screen. So we can have our children then say, ah, sh, sh, mash, mash. We're still working on blending. We're still putting those sounds together. If you noticed with your little ones that they started with and then they said ah, and then they said sh, and then when they tried to put the word together, the first sound was sh, you know that you've overloaded them a little bit. And it's the easiest thing to do is to take that one away or cover it with your hand. So for a moment, they're just going to go back to two sounds, and they'll say those two sounds first. Ah, and then make it sound like a word, ma. We'll say it a few times. I had a little boy one time who told me we should rev it up. So ah, ma, 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 ma. So it sounds smooth and fast and just like a word, and we can't get mixed up by it anymore. Ma, and then move our fingers out of the way and put that last sound on. Sh, ash, mash, and then they can read it. But it's important to notice if three sounds is actually quite taxing for them, you've got a strategy to pull it back to two and then add that last sound. It's important though that we're continuing to teach blending from left to right instead of dropping the beginning sound and figuring out that ending like a word family and then going back. Our brains like to look at words from left to right. So it's important when we're teaching our little ones how to blend and how to read that we want them to start at the left and blend across the word. It's important to keep building those same skills over and over again, starting with smaller words, building to bigger words, but always using that same strategy of blending those sounds together. They'll start to know lots of little pieces. And so when they're blending, they can go faster and faster because they can put those pieces together quite quickly. It's important that we're still teaching them that. We want their eyes to sweep from left to right as they read. And we can use our finger to help them do that, and they can use their finger to help them do that as well. So that's what we've got. We've got that big lesson. I just wanted to talk just for a moment about my scope and sequence before we're finished. We're almost out of time. On the first page, I have just given some thoughts about planning your own. You do not need to follow mine. I don't even always follow mine. I often will change it, move something a little earlier, a little later. I'll notice that something would be easier if it came after something else, and I'll shift it around. So it is not set in stone at all. And I've just sort of puttered away with playing with it for several years. So it's important that when you're feeling it, if you feel as though you're not quite ready to jump into digraphs, and you've only got a handful of single sounds, it's okay to keep going with single sounds first and then start to move into little combinations of letters. Absolutely okay. I picked my scope and sequence over many years, carefully plugging away at the things that I've got there. I really wanted to think carefully about what letters show up very frequently in words that our little ones need to read. Which ones can they print quite easily to start, to get that sense of printing? It starts to come along a little faster once we get going. I want to think about which ones can I stretch out so I can hold that sound long enough as they're learning to tune into the code, that they can stretch that sound long enough to start to hear it. Can't do that forever. At some point you need to learn T because it makes a quick sound, but it's really common, so it has to happen. But I really want to start my first few with ones that I can stretch so they can be successful early on and feel like they know what they're doing. I think about print formation. I know that a little vertical line is much easier for little ones than a curved line or than a diagonal line. So I want those ones to happen early so that they can use them and be successful. So I think about all those things. And then I think too, once I get through those 26 letters or those 26 letters and a few digraphs and maybe a couple of units, I've got lots of time left. Then I can start to think about other more complex patterns that I can start to teach. Again, I just keep adding which ones are common, which ones can we hear clearly, which ones are not too sneaky, which ones look like we could manage them, and then I start adding those bits in too. Always, I think it's worth doing a quick screener at the beginning of the year to know what letters and sounds your kids already know. Some kids will say, I don't know any letters, or I don't know those numbers, and that's a good idea for you to know that you're really starting from the very beginning. Other kids know lots and lots of letters already. Once you get into, especially in kindergarten, when you have the same students year after year for a couple of years, some of those ones who are year 2 students have learned a lot of code already this year, and they know a lot, so they're ready to get going on really a lot more complex things as they start their second year of kindergarten. Just have to judge, but it's helpful to know before you begin what they already know so that you can take off from there. There's no sense teaching things children already know in general, and there's also no sense teaching things that they are not ready to learn. So there, you must, I think, really attend to your littles and your bigs and notice that some of those little ones, no matter how hard you try, are just not there yet, and that's okay. Those are the ones you really want to play with the phonological pieces, play those phonological games we talked about the last time so that they're starting to tune in and listen. They may not be ready for their whole first year of school, but they've heard all of that instruction that was going on around them before. So when they come in for their second year of kindergarten, they're often quite wide open to it and excited to get going. It also is hilarious because often they will draw in, even when you might think you didn't really have time, or it wasn't really their turn, or it wasn't quite the right time that you were thinking for some of your little tinies. I often have kids pull up to my table when I'm working with my big seniors, and they'll say, I just want to watch. And they want it, they're hungry for it. And so it's quite fun, and I'll let them sit for a bit before I start to hook them in, because I want them to want it, because it's hard work. When they get sitting in there, they really need to be ready to do some work. My scope and sequence, then, I've organized it. At the beginning, it's sort of, I would aim to be starting in mid-September, and then, like I said, try to teach a few letters a week and keep going as quickly as you can. But if you notice they're not holding those sounds, it's time to ease off and make sure they're getting the sounds before you move on. It's not helpful if they're not remembering the sounds from week to week or from day to day. So each time, as you're watching them read their sounds, single sounds as you're flipping, if you're noticing that they don't know, that's a good cue to not teach something new that day and to back up and review. Sometimes you can review print formation, sometimes you can review a tiny little concept like what's a digraph? Go over that one more time. And that's the new learning for that day. The bulk of that time is actually going to be spent reviewing so that they really start to develop mastery of those letter sounds. Just carry on. In my scope and sequence, the other thing I was just about to say is that I often have put in the column next to the new code that I want to teach some kind of little cue that I would use in my class. So I say W instead of W on purpose, because when our little ones are listening for the sounds in W, they often get that little extra cue, that W. I often sing it. I didn't know I did, but a little one pointed that out to me. She said she always sings that one. And so now I sing it on purpose because it makes her giggle every time when I sing it now. But some of those little tiny tips and tricks are tucked into my scope and sequence just to help you out. If you want them to get going, feel free to change it, feel free to scrap it, feel free to use it. But it's I think at least a starting point for where you might be able to teach. And I think the kicker is to not get it in your head that we only need a little bit, or that we should really work on sight words. The kicker is that we need to teach these sounds. They need all of them. So keep sort of poking away at them, chip them off one after the next until you've got them all. Practice and review. And when we're practicing and reviewing, we can scoop back anything we've taught already and pull that in and use it again and again, so that we're building that capacity to hold all of the sounds that they already know and be able to pull them and use them as they need them. There we go. I think that's it for today.
Fantastic. Well, that's just great, Emily. Yeah, just it's always a delight to watch you in action. Alicia,
yeah, absolutely.
We've been both kind of monitoring the questions here and answering a few as we go, but there's quite a few for Emily. I should say at the last webinar, Emily, you did answer some of our unanswered questions later, and we put that in a document on the website. So depending on Emily's schedule, maybe we can do that tonight as well if we don't get to all the questions. So I'll let Alicia pull out some.
Yes, thank you. And I will do my best to get through as many of these as I can. But again, there are a lot of questions, so I've combined a lot to sort of pick out themes. And thank you so much for that, Emily. That was a fantastic presentation. And thank you for all that you've been doing for us, Emily, in addition to writing report cards, as all teachers are doing right now, and putting together this webinar. Emily's also been mentoring a group of teachers for us, and that's been fantastic. We hope to have more mentoring circles going in the fall. So if you're interested in that, make sure that you sign up for our email list so that you get that information. So to start off with the first question, and there are a lot, there were a few questions about whole group, small group instruction, and as well, are you starting this sort of instruction with the little tiny 3-year-old JK kids right off at the beginning?
Okay, that's really 2 questions, and I can do both. The first one, I use a combination of whole class and small group. I also do some one-on-ones with some who really seem like they're not keeping pace with those around them. So my whole group instruction, often when I have the same cohort of kids for a second year, becomes 2 large groups instead of whole group. Although at the very beginning of the year, I'll have my seniors there to show that routine to my little new juniors who are quite little. So they will sit with us and they'll help us, even if they already know a lot of those letter sounds at the beginning, just to build that routine and build the understanding of what we look like when we're learning code and what we're doing with our bodies and our markers and our whiteboards when we're working on our code, where our eyes need to look. All of those skills need to be built for littles who have never learned letter sounds like this before. It's important to build all those skills. I can remember specifically saying, make your eyes look at this yellow card when I'm holding it. And I think it's important to sort of recognize that we're going right to there, like right to where are your eyes pointing when I'm holding this card. So really back up and teach all those little bits. So, but then once I get going, I often will use 2 larger groups. One group is my littles who already really know a great deal of code, starting with, say, their second year of kindergarten, or who came in close to reading right from the beginning. My other group is my little ones, and so I can do a lot more playful work and a lot more wiggling and waggling and making that snake and making that whatever, like, oh gosh, imagine that we already ate that lollipop and now all we have left is the stick. And that's what we write when we're writing down the L sound, because it's just the stick. We already ate the whole lollipop. Like all of those sort of extra things that help build that understanding of those letter sounds, I can tuck in more and more and more. At the same time, some of my senior big guys who maybe didn't grasp all of that code early on can actually join that group again and hear that instruction again for the very first time, not as a review, but actually as an introduction, fresh and all over again, assuming in my mind, they didn't get it the first time. They missed something, they missed all of it, they were not ready. For whatever reason, they didn't get it. So they get a fresh start. It's not like I'm assuming they ought to already know that, so they just get a quick review. I really want to go back and teach it well and properly all over again as though it's brand new for them. That's the first thing. The second thing is sometimes, yes, my little threes, I have a little three, well, she's 4 now, but she's a December 30th. So really, really, really 3 when she started, and she is reading now, reading everything. And so they will show us what they can handle and what they can manage. And I think we followed their cue a bit there. So if they want to join in, I would never, never turn them away. If they only last for about 20 seconds and then they stroll away or they're rolling, I give them a spot where they can move. We put a little table together where there's some quiet little activities that they could go and choose. They're not always ready, but often they are. And at the beginning, the lesson is so short. Really, when we're doing 2 or 3 sounds, I can be in and out in 2 to 3 minutes. So that's not hurting them, even if developmentally it might be a little over their heads. It's very playful, it's very fun. They want to be close to their teachers anyway when they're at school for the most part. And so it's an easy one to just kind of tie them in. And sometimes it works and sometimes they need a little more time, and that's okay too.
That's great, thank you. That kind of dovetails nicely into the next question I was going to ask you, which is about screeners. So you had mentioned that you like to do a screen at the beginning to see what the kids know. And there were a few questions about what that looks like, what you're screening exactly. Are you just looking at the letters they know, or are there other things that you're looking at? So if you could speak to that.
Sure. So I use really typically 2 screeners at the very beginning of the year. The first one is just straight out letters, lowercases and uppercases, and then I just, do you know this one? Do you know this one? Do you know this one? And I always say at the beginning, if you don't know it, it's okay. I just want to know what you already know so I don't have to teach you that bit again. And so it's okay. Some of them will really be like, I don't know any letters, and that's fine. But also some will know all the letters. So my little screener is just all the uppercases at the top, all the lowercases at the bottom. Every time I'll say, oh, all the letters have a name and they also have a sound. I want you to tell me both if you know them. And then they'll tell me what they know. If they seem as though they don't know, sometimes I'll give them one more crack and I'll say, do you see any that you know? Do you know that one? It's in your name. And just give them a few more opportunities to pull something out in case they're feeling overwhelmed by just how much is there. And so sometimes I'll give them that little bit of extra. The other thing I do is a sound skill screener. So it's a short, basic phonological screener. It's listening for beginning sounds. It's listening for rhyme. It's generating rhyme. So, so start with like, do you have, the word milk and the word door, do they rhyme or do they not rhyme? And they'll say, oh, no, they don't. And then I'll say, what about hat and cat? Do they rhyme or they don't? And yeah. And then the next part is, what rhymes with the word bee? What rhymes with the word foot or whatever? And they can come up with those if they can. Short and sweet. It takes me maybe 10 or 12 minutes to do with each kid, and then it's done. And then I try to redo that one sort of about January, because if what I'm doing, and the letter sounds one too, if what I'm doing is not working and they're not holding on to those things and they're not progressing, I want to know in January. I don't want to know at the end of May when there's no time to fix it. I need to know sooner than that so I have time to make adjustments. When I'm thinking about my whole groups and my small groups then become groups that seem to be managing about the same amount. So kids who already know all 26 letters can start to be peeled out to be a small group as well. At the same time, those ones who are really, really not progressing, I notice and keep an eye on, and then they quickly become my little one-on-ones, and they get maybe sort of 6 to 12 minutes of one-on-one instruction with me every day or as frequently as I can. just quick, practice those sounds one more time, and then it's again really individualized to make sure that they're getting some support, because those are our strugglers. Those ones who are not managing to learn them with us and who are lagging behind the other kindergarten children, those are the ones we should be keeping a close watch on, because it's hard for them.
Absolutely, thank you. We have had a few questions as well about the use of lowercase letters and capital letters. Like, are you introducing both of them when you're teaching the children how to print? If you could speak to that.
I introduce lowercase letters first. In my classroom, I have alphabets on the wall that have uppers and lowers together. And we talk a lot about uppercase letters when we're talking about our names and the days of the week and the months of the year and those other words that are available in print in our classroom, particularly our names in the fall. But when we read, the vast majority of the letters we see are lowercase. And when our little ones are at home before they come to school, the vast majority of them are learning their uppercase letters from home, or their capital letters at home. They often come in printing their names all in capital letters, and we're filling in the gaps with those lowercase letters. So I tend to do mostly lowercase, and then I often will show them as we get going, this is what an uppercase would look like. Or if I, have taught only a tall man that wears a belt for my T, and then I want to use the word Tam as a name, then I might say, oh my goodness, when it's a name, we have to use the capital T, and it's not a tall man that wears a belt anymore. It's a straight line with a top on top. So I start to sort of add those cues in later, but at the beginning, I really focus on lowercase, and many of them know their uppercases. So I often will say then, when we're doing code, we're using lowercase. When we're doing code, we're using our lowercase, because I want to build those letters in, because those are the ones they need to practice the most.
Perfect. Thanks. And we have another question about those high frequency words that, kids can't sound out with early phonics skills or just are irregular words. How do you approach those?
Just trying to think if I brought any of mine. I don't think I did. I have little word cards. They fit. They're the same size and shape as my code cards, so they fit right in my pack, and I'll just tuck them in. So I might have the, or to, or come, or something tucked right in. I teach them really the same way but I wouldn't teach in or at that way, because in fact we can decode those ones. So I want my students, my littles, listening for the individual sounds and spelling them. I don't want them trying to memorize a list of words that they could decode. I want them to memorize the ones that they cannot decode. So they will not be able to decode the word the on their own. So I teach them that exact word. When we see T-H-E together, it says the. We do a little song, T-H-E spells the, T-H-E spells the, T-H-E spells the, T-H-E spells the. Often I'll slow it down as I'm singing it so that we have time to print, because I have one in particular that I'm really thinking of that will sing it every time, even after he's got T-H-E already tucked in his brain. You can hear him saying T-H-E spells the, T-H-E spells the, and it's slowing him down because he's singing the song instead of just writing it and carrying on. He does it every single time, and so it's quite helpful. We'll talk a lot. We call them red words. They're not in my pack right now, but they are on red card stocks. So they show up. I always say, oh, it's just like a stop sign. Tells us to stop, tells us to take note, because this word we cannot sound out with our code. We have to learn how to read it and spell it all at once. And so we just practice them. And then the same way that I would practice spelling in my lesson, I also will take time to practice those red words and really just practice them. And I'll say, oh, let's write down the word was. Remember, it sounds like it's going to be W, Z. It's not going to be that. Remember, it's red because it doesn't follow the rules. Oh, I remember, W-A-S spells was. Let's write it. W-A-S spells was. And we write it down. We picture it in our minds. We write it down. We talk about it. And we always use letter names for our red word letters instead of saying the sounds, because we don't want them to be going for sounds when we're talking about red words.
That's fantastic. Roughly how many of those red words do you introduce in kindergarten? Like, how many would be considered in that category?
Depends on the year and depends on the kids, but I would say a bare minimum of about 6 to 8. And so that's like to and the and said and was, like those of that they use a lot, that they need for their writing when they're going to tell me a story about, like, Mummy was laughing or I was jumping on the trampoline. They need it. So I have to make sure that I teach it. Other years I can get through 15, 20, 25, knowing that when you look at, say, the Dolch list or the popcorn words for kindergarten or any of those things, lots of those words are fully decodable. So already I'm peeling all of those guys off because my kids have learned to decode sound by sound across those words. So in fact, even if I teach, say, 10 red words in a school year, if they can decode all the regular words that they have access to because of the code they know so far, they still know way, way, way more than that list of 25 popcorn words for kindergarten. They've way surpassed that. So I think it's okay.
Another good question was about the reading material that you're sending home, and what sort of instructions and guidance are you giving to parents?
That's a really fun and interesting question. So because since being a remote learning person, I've learned some great things, because really up to that point, until we started teaching from home, I was doing a lot of my own writing. So I would think about the new code I was teaching and all the code we knew up to that point, and then I would make up some words, and I would make up some phrases, and I would make up some little sentences, and I would write them out on chart paper, and we would use them for our lesson. And then after the lesson was done, I would take a pair of scissors and I would snip the chart paper apart and fold up those strips and send them home with kids. So then they would get home and they would, like they were reading a newspaper, and they would open it up and say, "a tall wall," or whatever. And right, like they would take that home. But I've had parents who said they have all those words that you send home stuck all over their bedroom, and they can read their whole room. And it sort of filled me up. Like in that case, it was a family that really had no books at home and really didn't have a lot of literature at home at all. And so what they had at home were all things that their little person in JK could read by themselves. And that was pretty powerful. Like it sort of reminded me of why it was such a great thing. I was just going to recycle those papers if I didn't send them home, and they might recycle them at home, but at least I feel like they may have been given an extra life. Now, because I don't have that capacity, I'm still writing, but I'm sending like an email with a document attached to it. So I call it read and spell with all, or read and spell with ing, or read and spell with f, or whatever. And then it's some words, some phrases, some sentences. As we get quite a bit further on, I might do a little paragraph that's like a little story, and they can read those, and everything in them is controlled. Everything in them is things I've already taught, and I just don't use words, and I just don't use sounds, and I change my story a bit to match with things that I know I've already taught, so that there is no part of those that they would not be able to read. It takes some time, but now I actually have a big bank of documents because I've been writing them and emailing them instead of just writing them and firing them off on a chart paper and sending them home. So kind of excited, because from now on I won't have to just make them all up anymore. They're already there.
That's great.
7 years of sending them home without ever keeping a copy of them. So.
Well, fantastic. I think that was great. And we're, I think, beyond our time at this point, Jill. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thanks again, Emily. And we will we'll see if Emily has time to answer the other questions that we haven't been able to get to tonight, and post those. We posted them last time on the previous webinar page on our website. So before we finish, I would like to mention a few things. It's a shout out about checking out our website and our Facebook and Twitter feeds for information about dyslexia. Structured literacy instruction. We have a number of pages there under what works around structured literacy, the science of reading, structured literacy instruction, resources, training, and also on our events tab, you'll see upcoming events.